Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 874. 874, August the 21st, 2019, Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, because it is Wednesday, I will shortly be taking out the trash, and I had some chicken earlier. That's right, Wednesdays. Every Wednesday, I have some chicken and I take out the trash. Alrighty, let's get to it. Okay, so hearing a lot of talk now as we're getting closer to the end of the month. People looking forward to the Horowitz report, the IG report, and talking about what we can expect from that. And of course, we know that Barr and Mr. Durham have their investigation going on. And of course, we have Lindsey Graham talking about the fact that after the Horowitz report comes out, he's going to be having some hearings in Congress. We can expect that there'll be hearings probably on the House side as well, but of course that'll be controlled by Democrats. And they'll be trying to run opposition to Graham and everything that's coming out. They'll be trying to run defense, basically. So, anyway, I just wanted to kind of put everything into perspective here. And I look at it this way. You know, I've been covering this story right along with all of you who've been following and, in a sense, covering this story as well for the past 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years. And really, I think we know at this point what the big picture is. We even have a lot of small details. Now, there certainly are some things that we don't know. I'm sure the Horowitz report will learn some new things. I'm sure that with Durham's investigation, we'll learn some things. Maybe we'll learn some things from Graham's commission or his hearings in the Senate. I'm sure we'll learn some new things. But the fact of the matter is, we basically know what the big picture is. It's kind of like I've used in the past, the example of a puzzle, putting the puzzle together. And so I would say that we have quite a few of the pieces of the puzzle already in place. There's a few missing pieces, and there's still some loose ends that need to be tied up. But for the most part, we know exactly what happened in a general sense. So I just want to go through this and point out the things that we know in general that did happen, and it's just a matter of getting the details, tying up the loose ends, and holding people accountable. So while we're waiting for the Horowitz report, or we're waiting for Barr and Durham to finish their investigation, or for Lindsey Graham to do their hearings, I think that we can rest pretty comfortable with knowing that we do know pretty much what happened. And I've been covering it here now for a very long time on my TowerGate videos, and it's of course in my timeline as well. So I'm just going to kind of lay out what kind of the big picture that we have right now from everything that we've discovered up to this point, and then I'm going to go into a little detail into each one of these. Okay, so it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We really have 7 different I guess you'd say groups of operations that we have been following and that we know pretty much in general what happened. And these are all things that were working together. These are individual parts of one larger plot. So we know the first thing that we definitely know that happened is dealing with the Rotten Reverend Clinton, the Hillary Clinton campaign, hiring a opposition research firm, Fusion GPS, also hiring on this former spy, Christopher Steele, to help them propagate their garbage, I guess we can call it. So this was the first part of the plot, the narrative. The narrative of Trump working with Russia. Trump is a puppet for Putin, however you want to look at it. And that was primarily contrived by the Clinton campaign as was supposed to be an October surprise dirty political trick, is really what that started out as. Then we have another facet, which is the CIA with Mr. Potato Head John Brennan, and what his role was in this was to set the table for the FBI, because the CIA does not do investigations. They do intelligence work. So the FBI needed something to investigate to tie to Trump. And so the CIA essentially set the table using the Rotten Reverend Clinton's narrative, Trump Russia. And so Brennan's job in the CIA was to set the table for the FBI using the Rotten Reverend Clinton's narrative. Then, of course, we had the FBI and the DOJ. And, of course, they had several different things that they had to accomplish as part of the plot. Number one, first, they had to cover up, exonerate, and cover up the Rotten Reverend Clinton's crimes, so she would still be a viable candidate. Then, of course, they are the ones who execute law enforcement activities such as FISA warrants, search warrants of all different types, national security letters, all these sorts of things, all the surveillance. They actually do the legal part of investigations and actually do investigations. So they had that role to play in the overall plot. Then, of course, we have the White House. Of course, the White House, in this case, would be utilizing, of course, the National Security Branch in order to carry out their part of the plot, which would have been to sort of oversee and organize and sort of compartmentalize all of the activities that were going on with all of the groups I previously mentioned and other groups I'll mention here in a moment. So by using the national security apparatus, which would be the NSC, and of course we know the FBI has their own national security branch, and the State Department has a national security branch, the Department of Defense has a national security branch, and so all of these would be pulled together from the White House using the apparatus of the National Security Agency to do their part, which I believe in a large and in a big way from the White House would have been to really to approve and to coordinate all of these activities, because these types of operations that were being carried out had to be approved by the White House, and that would have been done through the National Security apparatus, the NSC, which was, of course, Susan Rice was the National Security Advisor. So this would have gone through the NSC, and that's how their role was. That was the role the White House played. Of course, we had the anti-Trump Congress, which would have been both anti-Trump Republicans as well as Democrats, who their role, of course, was to have constant hearings and to constantly badger the administration once the coup plot began after the attempt to keep Trump from being elected. Then he comes into office, the new Congress comes in, the very first thing that they do and begin, and they continue to do to this day, is to use their powers to subpoena documents, to subpoena witnesses, to have hearings. And so the fact that they took over the House of Representatives, that became the role that they played, is more or less a harassment campaign against the president. And of course it would be Congress who would be able to bring impeachment hearings, and that was the primary focus of the Democrats and the anti-Trump Republicans. Once the new Congress was sworn in, the primary objective for the entire next 2 years would be to have these hearings, which they hope would eventually lead to impeachment. Then, of course, we had the role of the media. And, of course, the media played an important role because, of course, they coordinated with the Clinton campaign. They colluded with the FBI and the CIA by participating in receiving the over 1,000 leaks provided to them by the FBI, by the CIA, probably by the State Department, other agencies, the Obama White House probably involved, all involved in leaking to the media. And the media's role, of course, to take that information and to use that to write stories, which in quite a few cases was then used by the FBI to use those very leaks that they or the CIA supplied in order to back up FISA warrants or to write stories or to have hearings or whatever. So feeding the media via all these leaks was an important part of the overall plot. So the media in this case was complicit in the plot. And of course we have the foreign governments who would have been involved. working along with the CIA. That would include, of course, Italy, Australia, and the UK, and of course Ukraine. And of course we know that the Clinton campaign, if you go back to the origins, which is where Barr and Durham are focused right now, the origins of all of this, the origins really begin in Ukraine with the Clinton campaign and the DNC and their middle person, Alexandra Chalupa. So these are all the groups that are part of the overall plot that was launched first to, number one, exonerate and clear Hillary Clinton, number two, to stop Trump from winning the election. Once that failed, the plot to take down Trump through impeachment. So there's really three plots that are all connected, and of course these are all the various groups that were working together, colluding together to bring about the desired result, which of course they have up to this point failed, and likely at this point I can be pretty safe in saying they have failed. So I think one of the key parts now that's being looked at here, they're going back and looking at the origins, as I just said. If you're looking at the origins, you're going to find that the origins of all this began really back in 2015. And it really began in Ukraine with the stuff connected to Manafort. And once Manafort became connected to Trump, that sort of allowed them to bring Trump into it. And at that point, all this information started flowing in to the Clinton campaign, to the DNC, and this is where they formed the base narrative. Once they formed the base narrative and they started pushing this stuff, that's when John Brennan and the CIA got involved. And I assume that there was some sort of coordination here. I'm certain of it, and it's one of the things I think that they need to discover. I think I've seen adequate evidence of it, but I think that there needs to be documents and things and such. I think there's plenty of circumstantial evidence to show that there was some sort of liaison or coordination between CIA and the Clinton campaign. They certainly understood where the CIA understood where this information was coming from, and they piggybacked on that, and they began to take the Clinton propaganda that was being pumped into just about everywhere. It was being pumped into the media by Confusion GPS, by Hillary Associates, other people in the media. It was being pipelined into the State Department and the Department of Defense and the FBI via Christopher Steele, via Mr. Sussman, the two henchmen, Cody Shear and Blumenthal, of course. So you had this part of the plot where the Right Reverend Clinton is just pumping this information out there. Now, as this information is being pumped out there, and I believe working in coordination, that's when the CIA comes along and they set up the 6-agency task force. That would be Mr. Potato Head sets up the 6-agency task force. So from this point forward, in spring of 2016, you now have this coordination of multiple agencies working together to propagate the plot. So what the FBI needed in order to really go after Trump was they needed something to give them a reason to launch investigations, to get FISA warrants or what have you. So this is where the CIA and John Brennan set the table for the FBI. They essentially set up these plots, whether it was luring Michael Flynn to London, luring and then setting him up, luring Papadopoulos to London to set him up, luring Carter Page. Of course, Carter Page is a unique situation. We're not really sure exactly what the truth is with him, but at this point, as part of this narrative, I think it's pretty well accepted and operating from the principle that Carter Page was also, in a way, set up, had the FISAs. That's how they were able to listen in to the Trump campaign. The only question is, was Carter Page part of this plot, or was he just a dupe? Was he used, or what have you? That is still, in my mind, not resolved. But it was these intelligence operations which were put into play, which essentially set the table for the FBI so that they could then do the law enforcement part of what they needed to do. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the White House. And you cannot run these types of counterintelligence operations, especially on someone who's the opposing candidate running for the presidency. That this could not happen without the president knowing about it, giving his approval. That would be Obama and the White House. And of course, in order to funnel all this information and get it to Obama, that will be done through the National Security Branch, of which is essentially the NSC, and that would be Susan Rice that would have been heading that up. And we know that that was done. And of course, that's where all the unmasking came in and all these sorts of things. So everybody is feeding everybody, is what I'm saying here. The Right Reverend Clinton, though, it all began with the Democrats, Hillary Clinton, her campaign. That was the first part of it, and we know that from Christopher Steele, because he said in his deposition that he was hired by Hillary's lawyer, Mr. Sussman, or Mr. Elias, one of the two, brought in Steele, and he said he was brought in to gather information that could be used for Hillary Clinton's campaign to challenge the election results if in fact she lost, which tells us a lot. It tells us that even back in the early summer of 2016, Clinton believed there was at least a reasonably good chance that she could lose, and she wanted to make sure if she did lose that she had some sort of a plot cooked up that she could challenge the election and try to overturn it. If she couldn't, she knew she probably couldn't win the election fair and square, just like she knew she couldn't beat Bernie fair and square. She had to cheat Bernie, and it was automatic. Once she got the nomination, she immediately set about the process of setting up a plot to win the election, and if that failed, then she would continue that plot in order to try to reverse the results of the election. She was willing to do anything to get her hands on that power. And it had to involve the White House. None of this happened without Obama and his top-level cabinet people, especially Susan Rice, knowing about it and being participants in it. Of course, the media played a very critical role. They weren't just spectators in all of this. They were actually participants, and they were knowing participants. Glenn Simpson and Christopher Steele were briefing all these people in the media. They knew what Simpson and Steele were pushing was bullshit. They knew it, but they put it out there anyway. They would run with anything that Simpson would give them, and they just needed a hook, a news hook, to be able to do it, to keep them getting sued. And of course, we know that's where Brennan, Clapper, and Comey come in. They go and they provide the news hook, which then allows the media to do their part of it. And once they got the news hook, then it was Katie bar to the door. It was just every day, multiple articles trying to sell the Trump-Russia narrative. And of course, the problem that they had is they were not able to get that done until after Trump won the election. So it only helped them in the effort in the coup. It really didn't help them too much in the general election, because most of the stuff that started coming out was just kind of like leaky stuff, and just, people saying things, but there was nothing really substantial or hard enough that it could have much impact. Probably frustrated the hell out of Hillary Clinton, I can assume. And of course, it didn't help that she had her own issues with Anthony Weiner's computer being discovered, and they had to reopen the investigation into that. Of course, that lasted about a week. Comey opened it, he closed it. They tried to get back to it, back to Trump, but by then it was too late. Election day was too close. It was a week away, and things turned out the way, thank God, that we needed them to turn out, with Trump being able to win. But that also turned loose the dogs, and they realized at that point they had a big problem, because they committed now all these crimes in an effort to stop Trump from being elected, but now he had won, so now they absolutely had to take Trump out through a coup, or however they could do it, impeachment, however. And of course, that was essentially the insurance policy, making sure they had a plot in case Trump did win, that they had some way to take him out. And the media had a huge role to play in that, and they still today, to this day, are playing that role. And of course, the foreign governments. Obviously, the CIA does their dirty business overseas, and that's why so much of this stuff was done overseas. But also, we know that governments in the UK, in Australia, various other government officials, they were just as unhappy about the idea of a Trump presidency as the Democrats here and the media here inside the States. So we saw what happened with Brexit. We know that the Brits actually tried to use the Russia narrative to try to convince people that Brexit vote was swung in favor of Brexit because of interference by Russians. So the Russia narrative was already born with the Brexit vote, and it simply was expanded upon and magnified, and then it carried itself across the pond to us. So they were willing participants in Australia, the UK, Ukraine, and Italy, obviously, to plot against Trump as well. So this is really, we know all these things happened. We know all this happened. There's overwhelming evidence. We've been covering it here. It's on my timeline. This is the big picture. This is the big picture of what happened. And there's a lot of details I don't have time to go into. It would take me hours and hours and hours. You can read my timeline. It's all there. But this is the big picture. This is what happened. They exonerated the Right Reverend Clinton, covered up her crimes. Then they used everything that they possibly could to stop Trump. Most of what they did was illegal. Then, once he won, they realized they had to take him out anyway, and that was the insurance policy, and that's where the coup plot begins. And so this is really the whole 9 yards of what happened. And all we're really waiting for with Horowitz or with Barr and Durham or with Lindsey Graham or whoever wants to investigate, we are simply going to get more details. But ultimately, we know what happened. We know what happened. I just told you what happened. And, you know, at some point, they are going to work their way up to the top of the pyramid, who the person or persons were who launched this. And while there were many parts, particularly in the beginning, overseas, there was things happening back in 2015. We know that the stuff was coming out of Ukraine in 2015, feeding Hillary Clinton, which is where the narrative was formed. Of course, they capitalized on this hoax of the DNC being hacked by Russians. We know that that wasn't true. It's most likely that Seth Rich was the person who got the stuff and gave it to WikiLeaks. That's still being covered up. So all these things were happening inside of this giant plot. And it was a gigantic plot, a huge conspiracy involving multiple agencies of the U.S. government, foreign governments. But it's just looking at the way the plot was unfolded, was put together. And when you go back to the origins of it, you certainly find that, in my mind, is why I keep saying that this was a Hillary Clinton plot. It started as a Hillary Clinton plot. I believe that she masterminded this, that she planned, organized, directed, and controlled it. Because if you go back to the origins again, you're going back to Ukraine in 2015, and you know, all these things that were happening. This information started with Manafort, and as soon as Manafort got connected to Trump, that was on at that point, and it became very easy to create the Trump-Russia narrative. Then the DNC gets hacked. How convenient. Then they're able to say, oh, well, you know, it was the Russians that hacked us, and they gave this stuff to WikiLeaks, and now they bring Trump into that plot. So they expand the plot. So they just continued to do this. And so, again, you have the CIA, who then began to get involved with the foreign governments, and they began to essentially manufacture. They manufactured the evidence that the FBI would need to be able to do what the FBI does, which is launch investigations and get warrants and start targeting people like that. And that was supposed to eventually lead to enough smoke that would maybe lead to a little fire, which they could use to pound Trump and hopefully keep him from getting elected. Obviously, the information that they had could not be verified, so it couldn't be used by the media because they were afraid they'd get sued by Trump. And so they weren't really able to get that going until after Trump had already won, when Comey and Brennan and Clapper hatched the plot to provide them with the news hook, which is what they needed, which was the Trump Tower meeting there on the 6th of January, when Comey went and told Trump, about the PP-Gate story. So anyway, this is really where the thing began, and that's where the coup really begins. From that point forward, it's all about the coup, which is taking Trump out, which had to do with the insurance policy, likely through impeachment. So because they knew that they did not have hard evidence, so the only thing they could use is propaganda. And because you really don't need evidence for impeachment, you can actually do it on political propaganda alone. And that is the only possibility they had, because they really had no evidence, because it was all fake. It was all fake news. It was all a fake conspiracy. And of course, now we've seen the Mueller thing completely come apart. That didn't work out the way it was supposed to. That was a crash and burn. And so here we find ourselves now within probably weeks, several weeks of seeing the Horowitz report come out. I believe it is going to be fairly damaging. It's going to talk about the FISA warrants and how that was all done and who was involved in all that. It's going to reveal a lot of problems, you might say. Certainly crimes are committed, I would certainly believe. I think there will be people that will get recommendations for indictments. Then, of course, at some point, we're going to get Barr and Durham's investigation is going to probably result in, we'll know at some point there'll be grand juries and things like that. And at that point, we'll know there's going to be criminal prosecutions. I can't imagine that there will not be, based on everything that we know, which I've just gone through. So anyway, this is basically what happened. I mean, this is what happened. We have a lot of little details, and there's some that are still left out. That's some loose ends that need to be tied up. But ultimately, as I've said many times before, this plot literally was cooked up by the Right Reverend Clinton and probably a small group of her cronies around her. Probably Podesta, Blumenthal, Schirrer, Slick Willie, maybe a couple of people at the DNC. Just the crony Clinton, the Clinton cronies with her inner circle probably cooked this whole plot up. And I do believe there was absolutely coordination with Brennan, likely coordination with the DOJ, probably through Loretta Lynch and Maria Renteria. We've already talked about that. So I think there was definitely coordination and throughout this entire plot. And I'm not so sure that this plot at the very beginning was completely thought out. I think that they had the basics of the plot thought out in the beginning, and that they just began to build and build and build on it, and everyone taking advantage everywhere they could. But the whole time, they all knew it was total bullshit. The Right Reverend Clinton knew it was bullshit. Steele knew his stuff was bullshit. The DOJ, the FBI, the CIA, the CIA literally manufactured this stuff, and I think that's going to be one of the most damaging things that comes out, because it just totally drives a stake through the heart of the narrative. Once it becomes clear that, remember, the investigation supposedly started with Papadopoulos telling Downer, okay, that he heard that the Russians have damaging material on Hillary Clinton. But once it's revealed that Mifsud was working for Western intelligence, and he told Papadopoulos this information, then Papadopoulos passed it on to Downer after Halper failed to get the information. They're like the Three Stooges. Halper, Downer, and Mifsud were like the Three Stooges, and they botched it. But they still were able to salvage it and use that to begin the operation. That's going to be, I'm certain that's going to be unearthed by Barr and Durham, and once you do that, that's the entire plot. Because obviously, you'll at some point arrive at the conclusion that I reached about 2 years ago, that there were no Russians. Those weren't Russians that were running into Trump campaign officials. Those were intelligence assets working for the CIA and their friends across the pond. And it was a coordinated effort between all of them. It was a gigantic ass conspiracy, is exactly what it was. It is exactly what it looks like to us today, as we have been covering it now for a very long time. So there's nothing really for all of us when the Horowitz report comes out, or when the Barr-Durham investigation is complete and they, do their report, or whatever they're going to do, whatever Lindsey Graham comes up with. None of us are going to be terribly surprised. Okay? We basically have been covering all this for a very long time. None of us are going to be really surprised. There'll be a few tantalizing details that we maybe didn't have. There'll be some corroboration of some things that we never really believed. The most important thing to me, obviously, is in tying all this together, finding the hard evidence of connection between the Right Reverend Clinton, intelligence, and the White House, which is where I think the three central power players are. Hillary Clinton and her group creating the narrative and providing the garbage, which was used by the FBI, and then, of course, the CIA, which manufactured the intelligence for the FBI to make the false narrative, the fake narrative that Clinton created, look like it's true. And then, of course, you had the Obama White House, where everything was likely being coordinated and essentially run. So it is a massive conspiracy. This is what happened. We know it's what happened. All that we're going to be learning from Horowitz and Brennan and Barr and all these guys, we're not going to learn a lot of new information. This is basically what happened. So none of us are going to be terribly surprised. Many people are. There will be many people in the country who don't follow the story, haven't been following the story. When all this comes out, it will be a huge, huge deal. And there will certainly be those on the other side who will deny it and try to argue against it and deny the facts. That will be Democrats and people like that. But ultimately, this is what we're going to learn. We don't have to wait for Horowitz. We don't have to wait for Brennan. We don't have to wait for Barr. We don't have to wait for Durham. We don't have to wait for any of these things. We don't have to wait. We already know pretty much what happened. And so that's why, I guess I should be more excited about Horowitz, or I should be more excited about Barr and Durham. And I am, in a way. I'm excited because the fact is we have uncovered all this information, and I talk about it every day on my TowerGate videos. It's on my timeline. Most of you follow these stories as well through other sources, including me. And so we all know what happened. But for all of us, I believe, for me, and I assume for all of you, the thing I'm looking at is now, what are we going to do about it? We know what happened. The question is, what are they going to do about it? And that's where my mind is focused on right now. What are we going to do about it? As far as what happened, we all know what happened. I just laid it out. I laid out what happened and who the various groups of people who coordinated together, who were involved in this, what they did and how they did it. So we know all that. We know who did what, pretty much. We know what they did, we know who they were, and we have a pretty good idea why they did it. All that's left for me and most of you at this point is to answer the final question, the most important question: what are they going to do about it? And I continue to hold the idea that once all of this is out, and it's out to the general public, and it can no longer be denied, I think it's going to be extremely difficult not to prosecute the people who committed serious, real serious crimes here. And it's going to be a political disaster for the Democrats. It's going to be a disaster for the media. It's going to be a disaster for the deep state agencies of the government. I would suspect there's going to be a lot of reform that's going to have to come about. There's going to be a lot of that type of stuff going on, a lot of going back and looking at things and saying, okay, how do we do something to make sure this doesn't happen again? We're going to get all that type of crap. But ultimately, at the end of the day, for most of us, it's not an issue anymore of us sitting back waiting for these reports to come out so we know what happened. We know what happened. We know how it happened. We know why it happened. We know who was involved. We just need to know now, what the hell are they going to do about it? Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate. See you guys. Bye.